The first thing I heard was the ice. Not voices, not the low music crawling out of the hidden speakers, not the scrape of chair legs over old tile. Just ice shifting inside a glass somewhere behind me, sharp and clean, like a warning whispered through a smile. That was what Il Fior sounded like before midnight. Beautiful enough to fool strangers, expensive enough to make them sit straighter, dangerous enough that even the waitstaff learned which corners to turn quickly and which ones to never take alone. I balanced a tray against my palm and tried not to think about the ache in my lower back. The dinner rush had gone long. My feet were swollen. The baby had been quiet for the last 20 minutes, which should have comforted me and somehow didn't. I had 6 more tables, $93 in tips folded into the lining of my bag, and exactly enough pride left to get through the shift without crying in the women's bathroom. Marini, my shoulders locked. Carlo Bersi was leaning against the service hallway wall like he owned the brick, the paint, the air. He wore a dark suit too tight across the stomach and a smile that never meant anything good. "I'm working," I said. "You're breathing, that's not the same thing." He held out his hand. The hallway was narrow. Kitchen heat breathed against one side of my face. The dining room glowed on the other. I kept the tray lifted between us. "I don't have it." His smile thinned. "Your father's notebook." The tray grew heavier. "I told you, I don't know what you're talking about." He caught my wrist so fast I almost didn't register it. Then pain arrived all at once. His fingers closed right over the fading bruise from 3 nights ago, and the tray tipped in my hand. "Don't lie to me, Alina." The glass slipped. It struck the floor and exploded. The sound cut through the restaurant so hard the room seemed to inhale around it. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Carlo leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey. "If you want to keep that baby and that pretty little apartment, you stop playing stupid." My hand went to my stomach before I could stop it. And that, more than the threat, more than the bruise, was what filled me with shame. That instinct, that terrified little movement. As if every person in the room had just seen the softest part of me exposed. Across the dining room, a chair scraped. I looked up. He was seated alone in the back corner booth beneath the amber wall lamps. Not alone, exactly. Men stood near him with the kind of stillness that meant they were armed. But the space belonged to him in the absolute way some storms belong to the sky. Dante Salvetter looked nothing like the stories told about him in the alley behind the restaurant. He looked worse. Not loud, not theatrical, not hungry for attention. He was dressed in charcoal, one forearm resting on the table, a silver lighter turning once between his fingers. His face gave nothing away. But the entire room had gone subtly, impossibly quiet, as if even the expensive air conditioning had learned not to interrupt him. Carlo let go of my wrist. Too late. Dante had already seen the mark. He rose. It was the strangest thing I had ever witnessed. No one announced him. No one reached for him, but every man in the room shifted half a step as if the earth itself had changed position. "Sir," Carlo said, smoothing his jacket. Dante kept walking. My pulse thudded at the base of my throat. I should have stepped back. I should have apologized. I should have done any of the small, practical things that had kept me alive this long. Instead, I saw Matteo, the dishwasher, 16 years old and all elbows, standing frozen in the kitchen doorway, staring with dinner plates still in his hands. And before Dante reached us, before I even understood I was speaking, I heard my own voice. "Please," I whispered, "not in front of the boy." Dante stopped. His eyes moved from my face to Matteo's, then back again. Something cold and unreadable passed through them. Carlo gave a short, nervous laugh. She dropped a tray. "She's emotional." Dante turned his head just enough to look at him. "What happened to her wrist?" Carlo's mouth opened, closed. "She's clumsy." Dante flicked the lighter once, then snapped it shut. The metallic click landed harder than the broken glass. "No," he said. "She's frightened." I had never heard a quiet voice make a man step back like that. Carlo tried anyway. "With respect, this is staff business." Dante's expression did not change. "You mistook my restaurant for a place where women leave bruised. It was nothing." Dante glanced at the shattered glass glittering around my shoes. Then he looked down at my hand still splayed protectively over my belly. When he spoke again, he was talking to me. "Are you hurt?" The stupid answer would have been no. The true answer was so large I could not have lifted it with both hands, so I settled for, "I'm fine." His gaze sharpened by a fraction. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew. The room seemed to know it too. Then Dante held out his hand. It was not a gentle gesture, it was an expectation. "Come here," he said. I stared at his hand. Broad palm, clean nails. Knuckles marked by old damage. A small white scar crossed the side of his thumb. Not a rescuer's hand, not a kind man's hand. A hand that had ended things and would end them again. I did not move. Carlo must have mistaken my hesitation for loyalty, because he spoke too quickly. "Elena, tell him it's a misunderstanding." Dante did not look at him when he said, "If she speaks next, it will not be to help you." My breathing went thin. "Sir," Carlo said, and there was fear in it now. Dante finally turned. "Luca." A man near the bar stepped forward. Tall, hard, watchful. "Take Carlo downstairs." Carlo went pale. "Boss, please." "Not in front of the boy," Dante said. That was the only mercy he got. Luca seized him by the arm and steered him toward the back hall. Carlo began to protest again, but one look from Dante killed the sound halfway out of him. The room pretended to return to normal. Forks moved. Conversations restarted in false, shaky pieces. Matteo vanished into the kitchen, white as flour. I was still standing in the middle of shattered glass. Dante looked at me for a long second. Then, very carefully, he removed a folded linen napkin from the nearest set table and crouched. Every muscle in my body seized. He wrapped the linen around my fingers where a splinter of crystal had cut me without my noticing. His touch was efficient, cool, brief. But no one had touched me carefully in so long that my throat burned with it. "You're bleeding," he said. "It's nothing. Stop saying that when it isn't true." I should have thanked him. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered who he was. Instead, I heard myself say, "You didn't have to do that." He rose to his full height again. "Yes," he said. I did. My heart gave one confused, painful beat. Then his gaze dropped to my stomach, then returned to my face. "What month?" I swallowed. "6th." He was silent for a moment too long. When he spoke, his voice had gone flatter, colder, more dangerous than before. "You'll gather your things after your shift." My skin chilled. "Why? Because you won't be finishing your shift. I need this job." "No," he said. "You needed it yesterday." That should have angered me. Instead, it frightened me more than Carlo had, because there was no heat in him. No show, no room to bargain with temper. "I'm not going anywhere with you." One dark brow lifted. It was not fun. It was an assessment. Then, in a tone so quiet it felt intimate against my nerves, Dante said, "Get her a new pair of shoes." I blinked. "What? There's glass on the floor, little brave." His eyes held mine. "And you're shaking." The nickname hit me strangely. Not tender, not sweet, a cold observation. A man noting damage in something alive. I wanted to hate it on contact. I wanted many things. Instead, I stood there wrapped in a linen napkin I had not asked for, in a room full of armed silence, with the most dangerous man in Chicago deciding my life had just changed. "I have a home," I said, though the word felt weak. "For tonight," he answered. Then he stepped aside and let Rosa Bellini, whom I knew only as the owner's imperious cousin from the upstairs office, appear with soft-soled shoes in her hands and worry in her eyes. Dante looked back once over his shoulder as he returned to his table. "By the time I'm done eating," he said, "you'll be ready to leave." It was not a threat. It was worse. It was a door closing. The Salvetter house did not look like the kind of place a frightened girl got taken to. It looked like the kind of place frightened girls were warned about. The gates opened without a sound. The drive curled past dark hedges and old stone statues silvered by lake wind. The mansion rose ahead in pale limestone and black iron, all clean lines and old money. The windows lit gold against the midnight cold. I sat rigid in the back seat, my overnight bag clutched in both hands. Gianni Russo drove with one hand and mourned into the rearview mirror with the other. "I had meal prep packed," he said sadly. Chicken, broccoli, brown rice, perfect macros. Then Rosa called and said she made lasagna and now all my discipline is ash. I stared at him. He was broad-shouldered and handsome in a loud, easy way, with a face too expressive for this world and a black suit straining over the chest. The dashboard lights caught the silver cross at his throat. In the passenger seat, Luca Ferrante didn't even blink. You say that every Tuesday, because every Tuesday she tests me. Rosa, seated beside me, made a dismissive noise. If you wanted me to respect you, Gianni, you would eat like an Italian and stop measuring almonds. I'm cultivating suffering for definition. You're cultivating a personality disorder. Against my will, a sound escaped me. Not quite a laugh, more the memory of one. Gianni pointed into the mirror immediately. There, see, she gets me. Luca turned halfway around in his seat to look at me properly for the first time. His expression was not unkind. Miss Marini, he said, for the next few days, if somebody tells you not to open a door, you don't open it. If somebody tells you to stay away from a window, you stay away from a window. If you see a car you don't recognize, you tell somebody. Understood? The lightness vanished from the car. I swallowed. A few days, Luca and Rosa exchanged a look. Gianni sighed. That's optimistic. I looked out the window at the dark water beyond the trees and told myself not to cry in front of strangers. Paolo would have made a joke by now, something crooked and soft to take the edge off my fear. That thought arrived so suddenly, it felt like a bruise pressed by a thumb. I turned my face toward the glass. 6 months. He had been gone 6 months and I still measured time like damage. The car stopped beneath the front portico. Someone opened my door. Warm air met us inside the house along with beeswax, polished wood, and the distant smell of rosemary from a back kitchen. No one said welcome. But Rosa took my bag from my hand, as if I had a right to let someone carry something for me, and that small theft of burden almost undid me. My room was at the far end of the guest wing on the second floor. Cream walls, iron balcony, thick rug, a bed big enough to get lost in. On the dresser sat a glass pitcher of water, a bowl of clementines, and a folded nightgown I had not packed. The windows were beautiful. The locks were heavy. Rosa saw me notice. They lock from the inside, she said. Then, after a beat, and sometimes from the outside depending on the night. My stomach tightened. I'm a guest or a prisoner. Her lined face softened, though not by much. Tonight, child, you're alive. Pick one blessing at a time. When she left, I stood very still in the center of the room. My apartment had peeling paint and thin walls and a shower that screamed before it turned hot. I wanted it so badly in that moment, I could taste the rust in the pipes. I wanted my own mug in my own sink. I wanted my own fear, at least, instead of this larger and more expensive kind. A knock came 20 minutes later. Not Rosa, not Gianni. Dante stepped in without waiting for permission. I had changed into the nightgown. My hair was loose. My bare feet curled into the rug. He looked larger indoors. Maybe it was the silence that traveled with him. Maybe it was the way the room seemed to organize itself around where he stood. You should knock harder, I said, because I was nervous, and nerves always made me speak as if words could build a wall faster than fear could knock it down. I did, you didn't wait. I wasn't asking. That should have startled me more than it did. He wore no jacket now, only a black shirt open at the throat, sleeves rolled once. There was a faint shadow along his jaw. His silver lighter gleamed briefly in one hand before disappearing into his pocket. You sent someone to my apartment, I said. I sent for, why, to collect your things before someone else did. I stared at him. Someone else. Carlo wasn't acting alone. The air changed. I folded my arms over my stomach. You know why he wanted me? I know he asked about a notebook. My pulse kicked. So Carlo had told him, or Dante already knew. Somehow that second possibility felt worse. It belonged to my father. Where is it? I don't know. The lie hung there. Dante noticed. Of course he noticed. But instead of pressing harder, he crossed the room and stopped at the balcony doors. He checked the lock with 2 fingers. Solid. Final. You can hate this house if you want, he said. You can hate me, but you stay inside until I know who's reaching for you and why. I didn't agree to that. His head tilted slightly. You think agreement is the thing keeping you alive tonight. Anger flared bright enough to burn through fear. No, I said. I think you like deciding things for people. Something unreadable crossed his face. Usually, he said, I decide after they give me a reason. And I gave you one. He looked at me then, directly. Fully, you asked me not to do it in front of the boy. My throat went tight. That doesn't mean anything. It meant enough. Neither of us moved. This was the first almost. Not a touch, not a kiss. Only a silence that felt as if it had leaned too close to my skin and forgotten to step back. Then he broke it himself. There are rules, he said. I laughed once, brittle. Of course there are. No phones by open windows. No walking the grounds alone. No answering the gate. If Gianni annoys you, tell Rosa. If Luca frightens you, listen harder. If you need a doctor, one comes here. The baby shifted suddenly, a slow roll beneath my palm. Dante's eyes dropped to the movement. The room shrank. It's late, he said. Something in his voice had changed. Not softer, worse than soft, controlled around the edges. Why are you helping me? I asked. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then, because I should have done it sooner. Before I could ask what that meant, there was a commotion in the hallway. Gianni's voice, wounded and theatrical. Rosa, if there's cream in that sauce, just tell me now so I can grieve properly. Dante closed his eyes briefly, as if suffering were a household feature. Against reason, the corner of my mouth moved. He saw it. The change in his face was almost nothing, but I felt it, a fraction, a crack resealed before I could name it. Then he stepped back toward the hall. At the door, he looked at me over one shoulder. I sleep better, he said, when I know where you are. He left. A second later, I heard the lock turn on the outside. Quietly, unmistakably. Morning in the Salvetter house began with coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and staff quiet enough not to disturb them if they changed their minds. I followed the smell downstairs because I had spent half the night awake, listening to old wood settle and new fear learn my name. The kitchen was larger than my apartment. Copper pots hung over a marble island. Sunlight spread over stone floors in long pale bands. A radio played low Italian songs near the pantry. Rosa stood at the stove in an apron the color of black olives, directing two kitchen girls with the authority of a field general. Gianni sat at the table holding a bowl of plain oatmeal as if it had betrayed him personally. Rosa glanced up. Eat! That was all she said. I sat. A plate appeared in front of me. Eggs, toast, sliced pear, tea with lemon. The kind of breakfast made by someone who had already noticed everything fragile about you and chosen not to embarrass you by naming it. Gianni poked his oatmeal. She gave you real food. She gave you real food, Rosa said. You just insult it. It has no joy. Neither do you before noon. He pressed a hand to his chest. Elena, understand this house. That woman believes butter is a moral principle. I looked at Rosa. Is it? She shrugged. In Italy, yes, I laughed then. For real this time, small but helpless. Gianni lifted a hand triumphantly. See, I am essential to morale, Rosa sniffed. You are essential to noise. It should have felt absurd, laughing in a fortress with men at the gates. Instead, it felt like oxygen smuggled under a locked door. After breakfast, Rosa put me to work, not with trays or menus, with pastry. You said you waitressed, she told me, handing me an apron. But your fingers checked the texture of my brioche before you sat down. That was not waitress behavior. Heat touched my face. My father baked. And he taught me. Good. The dough is overproofing. Save it. My hands remembered before the rest of me did. There are griefs the body stores in better places than the mind. I pressed air from the dough, folded, turned, listened to the tack of it against marble, felt the temperature in my wrists. Behind me, Rosa stopped correcting the kitchen girls and simply watched. You miss him, she said after a while. My father, and the other one. The dough slipped under my palms. Paolo, I kept my eyes on the marble. Yes, Rosa said nothing more. Some kindnesses know when to leave a wound closed. Later, when the bread was rising again and the room smelled warm and yeasted and almost safe, I went upstairs to retrieve the small tin box I had hidden beneath spare towels in my wardrobe. Inside was my father's notebook, blue cover, worn corners, flower thumbprints fossilized into the spine. Half recipe journal, half ledger of a life that had once included Sunday mornings and arguments about orange zest. I carried it to the balcony because the air was easier to breathe there. The pages were filled with his narrow script: pistachio cake, lemon cream, burnt sugar pears, measurements, temperatures, tiny notes in the margins. But every few pages, there were numbers that did not belong, ratios too large, oven times that made no culinary sense. Paolo had noticed it first. The night before he died, he had turned one page toward me with a frown. "Your father never baked at 426 degrees. That's not a mistake. That's a message." I had told him he was imagining things. Now I traced those numbers again, and cold moved under my skin. "Interesting reading." I flinched so hard the notebook nearly slipped from my hands. Dante stood in the doorway to the balcony. I had not heard him approach. He noticed that too. "I'm beginning to think you enjoy terrifying me," I said. "If I enjoyed it, you'd know." I should have gone inside. Instead, I tightened my grip on the notebook. He looked at the cover once. His expression did not change, but something in the air around him did. "You found it," he said, so he had guessed. "It's recipes." "No," he said quietly. "It is." My mouth went dry. "You know this book." He came no closer. Thank God. Another step and the space between us would have become something neither of us had named. "I knew your father." The words struck harder than they should have. "No, you didn't." His jaw shifted once. "Matteo Marini did books for 2 of my restaurants 15 years ago." My fingers tightened on the notebook. "He was a baker." "He was both." I stared at him. My father had hated restaurants after my mother died. He said too many men in expensive suits smiled with dead eyes. I had thought it was bitterness, or pride. Suddenly, I wasn't sure what it had been at all. "Why didn't you tell me that last night?" "Because last night you were bleeding." I looked away toward the lake. The wind moved my hair across my cheek. "When my father died," I said, "the police said it was a robbery." Dante was silent. That silence told me more than an answer would have. My chest tightened. "You think it was?" "I think men don't ask pregnant waitresses for recipe books unless they expect to find something worth killing for." A sound came from below, gravel crunching under tires. Dante's head turned sharply toward the drive. Then he was all business again, colder than before. Harder. "Luca searched your apartment this morning," he said. The place was already torn apart. The blood seemed to leave my face. "What?" "Drawers emptied, mattress cut, your lock broken before my men arrived." My knees weakened. I gripped the balcony rail. Someone had been there. In my home. In the tiny space where Paolo's sweaters still hung in the closet because I had not been brave enough to move them. Dante crossed the threshold then, not touching me, not crowding, simply standing close enough that if I swayed I would not fall far. "Look at me," he said. I did. "You do not go back there." I wanted to argue. The words rose and died. There was nowhere for argument to stand. "What if they come here?" I whispered. His face changed by less than a breath. "Let them." The answer should have frightened me more than it did. Maybe it did. Maybe the worst truth was that part of me felt safer hearing it than I had felt in months. Luca knocked once and entered without waiting. "Boss!" His gaze flicked to me, then the notebook, then back to Dante. "We caught one of Carlo's men watching the east wall." Dante's eyes stayed on mine for one last second. Then the pressure valve released. When he turned away from me, the room lost its human scale. "Bring him downstairs," he said. He left with Luca. I stood on the balcony with my father's notebook open in my hands and the wind lifting the pages. On the paper, numbers hid among recipes. In the house, men were already moving. And somewhere below the level of my fear, another feeling began to grow. Not trust, something more dangerous. Attention. That evening, the storm came in from the lake so fast the sky barely had time to darken before the first thunder struck. The house changed with the weather. Doors shut earlier. Lights came on warmer. Men at the perimeter traded radios in shorter, sharper voices. Even Gianni, who usually floated through tension like a loud balloon, checked the windows twice before dinner. Then Rosa handed him a plate of gnocchi. He stared at it in anguish. This is sabotage. This is food. This is war on my abdominal definition. Rosa set down another plate. Eat before I tell Dante you called my sauce sabotage. Gianni actually crossed himself. Elena, bear witness, I am abused in this home. The laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Across the table, Dante looked up. He had been reading something on his phone, one elbow braced on the long walnut dining table, the silver lighter near his plate. His gaze settled on me for half a second too long. Almost, that was the second one. I dropped my eyes to my food. Rain began against the windows in soft, quick taps. By the time dinner ended, it had become a hard silver sheet. I could not sleep. The storm was too loud, the room too large, the baby too restless. So I wrapped myself in one of Rose's shawls and drifted downstairs toward the back terrace, where the covered stone arch kept out most of the rain. Dante was already there. Of course he was. He stood at the edge of the terrace, looking out toward the black lake, his suit jacket folded over the back of a chair, white shirt damp at the cuffs. He lit a cigarette with the silver lighter, the flame briefly carving out the planes of his face before vanishing again. Click! The sound settled under my skin. I'm beginning to suspect this house has only one place to breathe, I said. He did not startle. You should be in bed. I was. That was fast. I moved to the far end of the terrace and braced both hands against the cool stone rail. Rain smell rose from the gardens, wet earth, clipped boxwood, distant water. For a minute we said nothing. Then he spoke without looking at me. Carlo talked. Something in me tightened. I turned. Dante flicked ash into the storm. He's been leaning on you for 3 months. Threats first, then your apartment, then your wrist. I hated how still I became when frightened. He said Marco Valenti wanted the notebook. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Dante said it told me it should have. Who is that? He took too long to answer. My underboss. The night seemed to narrow around the words. So one of your men did this to me. He is not my man tonight. A shiver worked through me, not from the cold. Why, for the notebook? That's not enough. No, he said. It is. Lightning split the sky wide enough for me to see the old scar at his temple I had missed before. The baby shifted. I pressed my palm low over my stomach. Dante saw the movement and crushed out the cigarette. Sit, he said. I'm fine. He turned his head slowly. You're becoming repetitive. I would have refused on instinct alone, but a sharp pull tightened across my abdomen at that exact moment. Not pain, not truly. But enough to send a flicker of alarm through me. Dante crossed the terrace in 2 steps. His hand caught my elbow before I could wave him off. Heat shot through me so suddenly it was almost humiliation. This was the first real touch that changed everything, not because it was intimate, because it was. Because his grip was steady and careful, and entirely about getting me into the chair without asking if I would faint pretty for him first. You're pale, he said. It's just the baby. Exactly. He crouched in front of me. The storm rattled the garden gates behind him. Up close, he smelled like rain, tobacco, and something colder beneath both. The dark outside clinging to him. I need a doctor, he asked. No, pain, just tightness. He watched my face the way I imagined he watched a room before deciding who would leave it alive. Then very deliberately, he set one hand on the stone arm of the chair instead of on me. Restraint. I felt it like a held breath. Breathe slower, he said. I obeyed before I could resent it. In, out. Again, when the tightening eased, relief made me weaker than the discomfort had. Dante noticed that too. He pushed back 1 inch, enough to return the air between us. Better? Yes, thunder rolled. I looked at his hand on the chair and noticed another scar, a crescent pale against his knuckle. How many times have you broken that hand? I asked. His mouth almost moved. Enough, specific. His gaze lifted to mine. You're nervous, you talk too much when you're nervous. I go quiet when I'm really upset. I know. The words landed low and strange. I should have looked away first. I didn't, almost. Then Luca appeared in the doorway. Boss, Carlo's being moved. The moment sealed shut, Dante stood. Where? I asked. Neither man answered immediately. That was answer enough. Did you kill him? Dante looked at me. No, he said at last. But he'll never touch another woman in one of my buildings. The phrasing chilled me because it left room for worse. Luca vanished back inside. Dante stayed. He told us one more thing, he said. Your father used recipes to hide numbers, transfers, names, dates. My fingers tightened in the shawl. I don't know how to read that. You will. How do you know? Because if Matteo Marini taught you pastry, he taught you ratios. He taught you patterns. He taught you what belongs and what doesn't. No one had ever made my father sound dangerous before. The storm softened slightly. Dante reached into his pocket, took out the lighter, then stopped with it halfway to his thumb. Another restraint. Another almost. He seemed to remember I was there and put it away again. Go inside, Alina. I stood, steadier now. At the door I turned back. Why didn't you do it? I asked. Do what? Kill Carlo in front of me. Dante's face gave nothing away. But something in the answer came from a deeper place than the rest of him usually allowed. Because you asked me not to do it in front of the boy, he said. And for the first time since I had met him, I had no idea which of us that answer disturbed more. I spent the next morning with my father's notebook open on the kitchen table and flour on both wrists. Not because I was baking, because it was the only way I knew to think. Rosa had given me paper, a pencil, and space. Gianni had contributed 3 oranges, 2 wildly incorrect theories, and a solemn vow to protect me from all men except Dante, whom he claimed was outside the jurisdiction of common sense. I almost smiled. The notebook lay open to a pear tart recipe. 6 pears, 2 cups sugar, half a lemon, bake at 426 degrees. Impossible. I wrote the wrong numbers down in a separate column. Then I flipped 2 pages ahead. Another impossible temperature, another wrong ratio. It's not accounting, I murmured. Rosa, slicing basil at the counter, said, No, it's placement. She glanced over. My heart began to beat faster. My father had taught me pastry like music, not just quantities, order, structure. Where sweetness sits, where bitterness belongs so the whole thing doesn't collapse under its own prettiness. I looked again. The fake numbers weren't measurements at all. They were positions. 426, page numbers, line placements, shelf rows. I sat up so fast the chair scraped. Rosa turned. What? These aren't measurements. They're locations. I flipped back and forth, pulse building. My father used to store specialty ingredients by row, shelf, and bin in the bakery cellar. If he wanted me to learn something, without writing it plainly, he would have hidden it where only someone who knew his kitchen system would look. Gianni leaned over my shoulder with an orange in one hand. I'm very handsome, but I'm not following. I pointed. 426, 4th shelf, 2nd row, 6th bin, not 426 degrees. Rosa's knife stilled. My throat felt tight. He wasn't hiding numbers in recipes. He was hiding where the real records were kept. Luca appeared in the doorway before I could say more. Boss wants everyone in the study. The notebook felt heavier in my hands. Dante stood by the long windows when I entered, jacket on, phone in one hand, silence everywhere else. Tommaso Greco was there too, elegant, gray-templed, composed enough to make calm look expensive. I had seen him twice in the house already. He always seemed to appear when information did. Dante looked at the notebook, then at me. Tell them. So I did. By the time I finished explaining the storage code, Tommaso had gone very still. Matteo Marini owned a bakery on Halsted, he said. Burned 9 years ago. My heartbeat stumbled. No, it closed after my father died. Tommaso met my eyes gently. The front shop closed. The basement burned 6 months later. 6 months later. The same month Paolo died. The room tilted. I gripped the table edge. That's not possible. Dante moved first, not toward my face, not to gather me up like I might shatter prettily. He slid a glass of water toward my hand and waited until I took it myself. Restraint again. Paolo had a key, I whispered before I could stop myself. The room changed. Dante's gaze sharpened. To the bakery, I nodded once. My hand trembled against the glass. He said he wanted to clean it out, sell the mixers. I thought he was trying to help me move on. I laughed, but it came out broken. He went there the night before he died. No one interrupted. That made it worse. Tommaso asked quietly, "Miss Marini, did he find something?" I looked down at the notebook. He left me a voicemail. I had never played it, not because I forgot, because grief can make ordinary actions feel like murder. As long as I didn't hear his last message, part of me got to keep believing there might have been another one after it. Dante understood that before I said it. I could tell by the way his face didn't soften. "Play it now," he said. My phone was in the evidence bag Luca had taken from my apartment. He retrieved it, handed it to me, and turned the speaker on. My thumb shook so hard I missed the first tap. Then Paolo's voice filled the study. "Lena, if you get this, don't come to Halstead, I mean it. Your father hid something, and Carlo's asking the wrong questions. I think it ties back to Salvetter money, but not in the way they think. If anything happens, take the blue notebook to someone above Carlo. Not Valenti, never Valenti. And Lena," a sound in the background, a door, Paolo inhaling hard. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted one more normal day with you." The message cut into static. No one spoke. I couldn't feel my fingers. Dante took the phone from my hand before I dropped it. Not Valenti, Marco Valenti. The name sat in the room like a knife no one had acknowledged until now. Gianni muttered a prayer under his breath. Luca swore once in Italian. Tommaso looked toward Dante with controlled alarm, but it was Dante I watched. He did not explode. That was the terrifying thing. He only went quieter. "What does not in the way they think mean?" I whispered. Tommaso answered before Dante could. "If your father tracked payments, they may not prove theft. They may prove laundering routes. Or names protected inside the routes." Something was wrong in the way he said it. Too smooth, too ready. Dante heard it too. I knew because his eyes flicked to Tommaso for only a second, but the air between them changed. Small, invisible, deadly, betrayal suspected, not confirmed. I stood because I could not bear sitting under everyone's knowledge. "I need air." Dante stepped into my path before I reached the door, not touching, never touching unless he had to. "Elena," I hated the break in my voice when I said, he knew, Paolo knew and still went alone. Dante's answer was low. "Because he was trying to keep you out of this. He died anyway." Something dangerous moved across his face, but when he spoke it was to me alone. "So did your father." My eyes burned. The room disappeared around the edges. All I could see was the blue notebook between us, my father's handwriting, Paolo's voice cut off mid-breath. And Dante, standing there like the only thing in the room strong enough to hold the weight of both dead men. He moved aside at last, but as I passed him, he said very quietly, "Little Brave." The nickname was still in possession, still observing, but now it carries a warning too. And grief answered it before I could. We left before dusk. Dante did not want me near the house once Marco's name was spoken aloud, and I did not want to stay where every shadow now seemed arranged around old lies. Luca drove the lead car. Gianni drove the second. I sat in the back beside Dante with the blue notebook wrapped in a dish towel on my lap, as if it were something domestic, harmless, incapable of getting men killed. The city rolled past in wet gray blocks, viaducts, laundromats, shrines in restaurant windows. Chicago after rain looked scrubbed and tired and mean. "We're going to Halstead?" I asked. Dante's profile stayed turned toward the window. "The old bakery, to see if anything survived, to see who gets there first." That answer sat cold in my stomach. I kept both hands on the notebook. The baby shifted once, uneasy with my pulse. Beside me, Dante reached into his pocket, thumbed the silver lighter open, then shut it again without lighting anything. Click. His habit when he was thinking, or when he was restraining something worse. "We can come back," I said. He looked at me. "Because I'm pregnant?" I asked, already hating myself for how defensive I sounded. "Because you're a target. Same difference in your mind?" "No," his voice was flat. One of those things makes you vulnerable, the other makes men stupid. The heat of that stayed with me too long. We were 3 blocks from Halstead when the first shot hit the windshield of Luca's car. Everything happened at once. Glass blew white across the lead sedan. Gianni swore so creatively, I almost admired it. Dante's hand slammed to the back of my neck and forced me down across the seat before I could even gasp. Stay down! Gunfire cracked under the overpass. Hard, echoing metallic. Gianni jerked the wheel, the car fishtailed, the notebook slid. I clutched it against my chest. Another shot punched the rear window. Dante shoved himself half over me, one arm braced against the door, his body making a wall where there wasn't one. His face had gone utterly still, not angry. Feral in a colder way. Luca's car swerved sideways ahead, blocking the lane. Men were already moving from the pillars. 3, no, 4, black jackets, pistols, 1 rifle. Dante kicked open the car door before we had fully stopped. "Don't move," he said to me. Then he was gone. I heard the first man go down before I saw him. There are things the body recognizes before the mind can bear them. The difference between chaos and skill is one of them. Dante crossed the wet concrete with horrifying efficiency, gun low, movements economical enough to make panic look wasteful. 1 shot, shift, another, no yelling, no warnings. Just decisions with recoil. Gianni, somehow firing and complaining at the same time, shouted, "I swear to God if I get shot before my cheat meal." "Left," Luca barked. I looked up too soon. A man had come around the far pillar with a clear angle on Dante's back. I didn't think, I only saw it. "Dante!" He turned on the sound of his name. The bullet meant for his spine ripped through his upper arm instead. My scream stayed trapped somewhere under my ribs. He dropped to one knee, fired twice, and the shooter went down. Then Dante stood again. Blood ran dark down his sleeve. The world narrowed to that line of red. Seconds later it was over. Sirens far off. Rain dripping through the gaps in the overpass. The smell of metal and powder and hot engines. Dante came back to the car, breathing hard, gun lowered, eyes looking only for me. I pushed out before anyone could stop me. "You're hit. It's through. That is not better." He stared at me for 1 stunned second, maybe because I sounded angry instead of frightened. Maybe because I had one hand on his bleeding sleeve, and the other still wrapped around the notebook like both things mattered equally. Luca approached, blood on his collar that wasn't all his. "We have to move," Dante nodded once. Gianni opened the back door of the lead car. "Fantastic, wonderful, ambushed under a bridge like raccoons." This is exactly the glamorous criminal life I was promised. No one answered him. We reached a safe apartment above an abandoned tailor shop on Taylor Street 10 minutes later. 1 room, locked shutters, a kitchen hardly bigger than a closet. Luca stayed downstairs with 2 men. Gianni took the hall and loudly informed the Virgin Mary he had behaved heroically on an empty stomach. Inside, I made Dante sit. He did it only because the arm was bleeding through the suit shirt now and because I said, "If you fall over, I am not carrying you, so choose dignity." The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. I found the first aid kit under the sink. My hands were steadier than I felt. That surprised both of us. "You know how to do this?" he asked. My father cut himself every Christmas making nougat. That doesn't sound reassuring. It means I've stitched stubborn men before. He went still at that. "Stitched? Not today," I said. "Hold still." I cut the sleeve seam open with kitchen scissors. The wound was ugly but clean through the flesh, missing bone. I exhaled slowly and washed it while he watched my face instead of his arm. This close, I could feel the force of his restraint like heat. His hand flexed once on his knee, then stilled. "Why did you yell for me?" he asked. I glanced up. "What? You saw the shooter, you called my name." His voice lowered. "Why?" I swallowed. "Because I didn't want him to kill you." His gaze held mine. Almost. My fingers trembled on the bandage. "And because if you died before telling me what the hell is happening, I would haunt you." A breath left him. Not laughter exactly. Something rarer. When I tied off the final wrap, he lifted his uninjured hand. Not to touch my face. to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear, then stop with his knuckles just shy of my cheek. Third restraint. His eyes dropped to my mouth and rose again. Controlled, bleeding, dangerous. I knew it in the restaurant, he said. My pulse kicked hard. Knew what? His gaze went briefly distant, not from me but inward. Dante, she had been shaking, bruised, outnumbered. And still the first thing she gave him was not fear for herself, but protection for a boy holding plates in a doorway. Not in front of the boy. No woman in his world had ever looked at violence and reached first for innocence. That was the moment. Not her face. Not the child under her heart. That impossible, unbearable instinct toward mercy. It had gone into him like a blade and stayed there. His eyes came back to mine. You were afraid, he said quietly, and you protected someone weaker than you anyway. The room forgot air. I could not speak. Little brave, he said again, and this time it wasn't cold at all. He should not have touched me then. He did anyway, just the back of his fingers against my jaw, so light it felt like the beginning of a question. I closed my eyes. Dante, my voice broke on his name. That was all it took. He leaned in slowly enough for me to stop him, slowly enough for my fear to have dignity. His forehead touched mine first. Then his mouth found mine, careful, brief, devastating in its restraint. No hunger taken, no demand, just warmth, hesitation, and something so controlled it hurt more than if he had simply lost it. When he pulled back, I heard Gianni outside the door mutter, "If anyone in there starts making life choices, please remember the walls are made of paper." The sound that escaped me was half laugh. Half sob. Dante's thumb brushed once below my eye, then his face hardened as footsteps thundered up the stairs. Luca threw open the door. "Boss," he said, "Marco just hit the house." Dante stood. War had arrived. The house smelled like smoke when we got back. Not burned to the ground. Not yet. But one wing had taken fire, and the front courtyard was slick with water from the hoses. Men moved in sharp, exhausted lines. Rosa stood under the portico in a black coat, directing paramedics with the authority of a saint who had lost patience. The second I stepped out of the car, she took my face between both hands. "You're all right," I nodded. Her fingers tightened once. Then she saw Dante's bandaged arm and swore in a way I would not have believed possible from a woman who made ricotta by hand every Thursday. Luca had been hit too, not a bullet. A blade across the ribs during the chaos near the west wall. He insisted it was nothing, then nearly collapsed walking into the foyer. I followed the stretcher halfway to the downstairs sitting room before Dante caught my wrist. Not bruising, only stopping. "Enough, he's hurt because of me. He's hurt because men came to kill me. That doesn't help." "No," he said, "it doesn't." He let go first. The rest of the night blurred into motion, repairs. Reports, men arriving from other properties. Gianni appearing with a bandage over one eyebrow and complaining that he had achieved a deeply unflattering martyr aesthetic. Rosa forced broth into everyone. Tommaso moved through the house with perfect calm, taking names, answering phones, assigning watches. Too perfect. I saw it now. Or maybe I wanted to see it, because suspicion needed a face, and Marco was still a distant shape in expensive rooms I had never entered. Near midnight, I found Luca awake on the sitting room sofa, pale but upright, shirt open under fresh gauze. "You should be asleep," I said. "So should you." I sat in the chair opposite him. The room smelled of whiskey, antiseptic, and the old leather of books no one had time to read. He studied me for a moment. "You want the truth?" "Yes. If you stay," Luca said, "more people will bleed around you." The words struck clean. "Because of me. Because of what you have. Because of what you mean to him now." Heat rose to my face at the second part. "You say that as if it's decided." Luca's mouth twitched despite the pain. "In this house, some things are obvious before anyone confesses them." I looked down at my hands. He continued more softly. "Rosa has a cousin in Milwaukee, small bakery, church next door. No one would look there first. A leaving door, real, open. You'd help me go. If Dante ordered it, no." Luca held my gaze. "If you chose it yourself before he asked, yes." My chest tightened. There it was, the thing I had been too frightened to name. Escape not stolen, offered. I went upstairs and packed before I could lose my nerve. Not much, maternity dresses, my father's notebook. Paolo's watch, a photograph of my parents on the beach in some happier decade. Every small object looked suddenly guilty in my hands, as if choosing them meant choosing who I had been before this house. When I came downstairs with the bag, Rosa was waiting in the dark kitchen. She took one look at it and closed her eyes. "I'm not asking permission," I whispered. "I know." Her voice held no accusation. That made it harder. "I can't raise a child inside Crossfire." "No," she said. "You can't." I pressed both hands to the counter to steady myself. "If I stay, I become someone I never planned to be." Rosa moved closer and tucked my scarf properly around my throat, because some women mother through war the same way they mother through weather. "And if you leave?" she asked. I thought of Paolo's voice, my father's notebook, Dante under the overpass, bleeding and still turning back toward me first. I thought of Matteo in the restaurant doorway, of Luca on the sofa, of the fact that Marco would not stop because distance asked politely. "I don't know." Rosa kissed my forehead once. "That is at least an honest answer." Gianni drove me to Union Station before dawn. He was quieter than usual, which somehow worried me more. "At a red light," he said, "for the record, I think this is a terrible idea." "I know. I also think Dante is going to become an environmental hazard when he finds out." "I know." He drummed the wheel. "And Rosa made me promise not to cry, because she says men who complain this much dehydrate easily." A laugh escaped me and hurt on the way out. At the station, he carried my bag inside and glared at every man within 20 feet, as if daring them to worsen his morning. When the announcement came for Milwaukee, I stood. My whole body felt split open. Gianni caught my elbow. "Elena," I looked up. He tried for levity and failed. "If you get to this cousin's bakery and she feeds me low-fat cheese, I will know you've betrayed me personally." My eyes burned. Then I walked toward the platform, 10 steps. 12. I stopped when I heard a teenage boy somewhere behind me drop a paper cup. The sound shattered across the station floor, cheap plastic, not crystal, but close enough that my blood turned cold. A little boy near the vending machines flinched. His mother pulled him in close, and suddenly I was back in Il Fiore, asking for violence to spare innocence, as if such things had ever listened. Marco would not stop. Not for trains, not for cousins in Milwaukee, not while the notebook existed, not while Dante stood between him and whatever truth my father had buried. Leaving would save only my conscience, maybe not even that. I turned around. Gianni, halfway to the exit, saw me coming and threw both hands to heaven. "Of course," he said. "Naturally. Why would anyone let me have a simple commute? I'm going back." His face changed. The humor stayed, but something gentler moved beneath it. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I thought you might. What if it ruins my life?" Gianni took my bag without comment. "Princess, sorry, no, wrong movie. Elena, I drive dangerous idiots for a living. Let me offer a professional opinion." He opened the station door for me. "Some lives only become theirs after they stop trying to keep them clean." The sky was just beginning to pale. I walked back into the cold with my bag in one hand, and my old future falling away behind me like a train I had chosen not to board. This time, when I returned to Dante's house, no one had dragged me there. I came back by myself. Dante was waiting in the front hall when Gianni brought me home. He had not slept. I knew it instantly. The stillness in him had gone brittle around the edges, and the bandage beneath his black shirt sleeve had seeped faintly red again. Men gave him space the way fields give space to wildfire. When he saw me step through the door, something terrible and controlled moved across his face. No one else spoke. Gianni, proving he valued survival at least as much as jokes, placed my bag on the floor and retreated without commentary. Dante walked toward me, not fast. That made it worse. "You left, yes. You came back, yes." The hall held its breath. His eyes dropped once to the bag in my hand, then came back to my face. "Why?" The answer cost me exactly what it should have. "Because I know what your world costs now," I said, And I came back anyway. Something in him reacted to that, something so deep he had no clean way to hide it. But when he spoke, his voice was almost cold. Do you think that makes me grateful? No, my heart hammered. I think it makes me honest. For a second I thought he might touch me. He didn't. Fourth restraint. Upstairs, he said. We're done discussing this in public. In his study, with the door shut and the house muffled behind heavy wood, he turned on me for real. What if Marco had men at the station? What if he has men here? He does, I blinked. Dante's jaw tightened. That is why you do not make theatrical decisions before dawn. Anger flared through my fear. I was not performing for you. No, he asked. Then, what do you call walking into a train station pregnant and alone while half the city is looking for what's in that notebook? I call it trying to decide whether my child deserves a life without. Guns, silence. The hard kind. Then something in his face changed, not softened exactly, but fractured in a place he clearly hated having exposed. So do I, he said. The words hit lower than anger could reach. I sat because my knees went weak. He stayed standing, one hand on the desk, breathing measured through whatever the confession had cost him. I'm sorry, I whispered. For leaving, for thinking I was the only one afraid. His gaze lowered, briefly, then lifted again. That might have been enough for the morning to become something else. But Tommaso knocked twice and entered with a folder in hand and concern perfectly arranged on his face. Boss, we traced one of Valenti's shell accounts. Dante straightened. The fracture vanished. Tommaso set the folder down. There's also something else. The bakery on Halsted. We found a maintenance sub-basement beneath the old proofing room. If Marini hid records, that would be my first look. My pulse jumped. How do you know about a sub-basement? Tommaso smiled mildly. Old city permits. Too quick again. Dante noticed the same thing I did, but he only nodded. We move in an hour. The plan should have been simple. It was not, because I made my mistake then. Not by leaving, not by coming back. By deciding I could test Tommaso on my own. While the house turned itself toward departure, I went to the archive room off the library where property files were kept and found the old Halsted permit box. My hands moved fast, guilty, stupid. There was no sub-basement listed. Only the cellar my father used for sugar, liquor, and holiday molds. I had just slid the file back when Tommaso's voice came from the doorway. You're clever. Ice moved through me. He closed the door gently behind him. You lied, I said. He looked almost sorry. I hoped you wouldn't notice until later. I backed toward the shelves. Marco sent you? No, he adjusted his cuffs. Marco offered me a future after Dante finished turning every room into a mausoleum. My skin went cold. You were his friend. Tommaso smiled without warmth. That is exactly the problem. I remember who Dante was before grief made him holy in everyone else's eyes. The villain mirror. I saw it then even if I couldn't yet name it. Not pure evil, but a man who had stood too close to Dante's darkness and chosen to worship the part that consumed instead of the part that restrained. I opened my mouth to scream. He moved faster than I expected for a man his age. A cloth over my face, bitter chemical, shelves tilting, my father's permit box falling sideways. When I woke, my wrists were zip-tied in front of me, and the air smelled like old yeast, dust, and damp brick. The bakery, of course. A single bulb swung overhead in the cellar. Broken metal racks lined the walls. My father's old marble bench stood in the corner under a tarp. Memory rose so violently it almost made me sick. Tommaso crouched in front of me, calm as prayer. Where are the missing pages? He asked. I stared at him, he sighed. I admired your father, you know, he understood numbers, he simply lacked the appetite to profit from them. You killed him. No. Marco ordered it, I permitted it. The distinction made me want to be sick. Footsteps sounded above us. Another man descended. Not Carlo, larger, scar at the chin. Tommaso stood. Call Valenti. Tell him she's ready. Ready. I inhaled once, slowly, forcing my thoughts into order. The cellar. The racks. The old proofing oven vent is still exposed along the ceiling. The emergency gas lever my father made me memorize when I was 12 because sugar dust could ignite. I had not broken yet. I wasn't going to. Tommaso turned back to me. Dante will come. Yes, I said, voice raw but steady. And that was your first mistake. He smiled sadly. No, Alina. You were. Then the light above us flickered once, and somewhere overhead a door opened. It was too late. The first thing Marco Valenti said to me was, "You look like your father when you're angry." He came down the cellar stairs with his coat unbuttoned and rain darkening the shoulders. As if kidnapping pregnant women in old bakeries were simply another item on a busy calendar. He was handsome in the deliberate, aging way some men maintain like a weapon, silver at the temples, a strong mouth built for promises he never intended to keep. I hated him on sight. Tommaso stepped aside. She hasn't given us the pages. Marco looked mildly disappointed. No, that's inconvenient. He crouched in front of me. I held his gaze because fear had already had enough of my body for one life. Your father kept duplicate ledgers, Marco said. One for the roots, one for the names protected inside them. Judges, aldermen, port inspectors, priests with expensive tastes. Dante's father built an empire on discretion. I helped modernize it. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then Dante inherited the throne and developed a conscience exactly where it was least useful. I swallowed my disgust. And that offended you? It endangered everything. There it was again. Not madness, belief. He leaned back on his heels. Dante still thinks rules redeem him, still thinks only some people deserve to be buried by this world. A faint smile touched his mouth. He forgets empires survive by feeding themselves. Above us faintly, I heard a car door slam. My pulse changed. Marco noticed. Yes, he said softly. He'll come. Tommaso shifted toward the stairs. Should I prepare the west exit? In a moment. I lowered my head as if in defeat and forced my breathing slow. The proofing oven vent ran along the left wall. The emergency gas lever was behind the old flour bin. If I could reach it, the alarm line, ancient and unreliable but still connected to the upstairs bell, might trigger when pressure changed. My father once made me test it twice a year because safe kitchens are built by suspicious people, Lena. I was zip-tied, pregnant, and nauseous with fear. I was also a baker's daughter. Can I sit up properly? I asked. I'm getting dizzy. Marco considered me, then nodded to the scar-chinned guard. He hauled me onto an overturned crate. Good, closer. I let my eyes unfocus, counting distance. 3 feet to the flour bin, 1 more to the lever. If I could knock the bin over, Marco spoke again. Where are the pages? I looked at him. You killed Paolo. A pause. Indirectly, he said. He was brave, misguided, the most expensive kind of dead. The answer hurt so cleanly my vision blurred. But grief can be fuel when it has nowhere wholly to go. I kicked the crate sideways with all the force I had. It toppled into the flour bin. Metal shrieked. The bins slammed the wall. Dust exploded into the air, and the hidden gas lever snapped half down under the impact. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the bell upstairs began ringing like a mad church. Tommaso swore. Marco surged to his feet. Idiot! I grabbed a handful of flour and threw it in the guard's eyes before he could seize me. He staggered, cursing. I ran, not far. The baby's weight and the zip ties made balance clumsy, desperate, but I knew the cellar better than any of them. I ducked behind the marble bench as a shot cracked and chipped brick over my head. Then the world above us exploded. Boots, shouts, gunfire, Dante. The cellar door blew inward so hard it hit the wall. Luca came first despite the bandage at his side, face white with pain and fury. Gianni behind him, shouting, If anybody dies before lunch, I'm quitting on principle. Gunfire filled the room. Tommaso went down with a shot through the shoulder, then disappeared behind the racks. Marco fired once, twice, retreating toward the rear stairs. I crawled toward the bench edge, breath tearing in my throat. Then Dante was there, not arriving like salvation, arriving like judgment. He crossed the cellar in 3 strides, dropped to his knees, and cut the ties at my wrists with a blade drawn so fast I barely saw it. His hands framed my face once, hard enough to confirm I was real. You hurt? No, lie, but the right one. His forehead touched mine for half a second. wordless, raw. Desperate in a way that made my chest crack open. Then he pulled back because bullets were still moving through the room. "Can you stand?" "Yes." "Then get behind Luca." I grabbed his sleeve before he could turn. "Marco knows about the duplicate ledger," I said fast. "The protected names. He says your father built it and he refined it." Dante's eyes changed. Not shock, recognition, the slow mystery opening. He looked past me and saw Tommaso dragging himself toward the rear door. Something colder than hatred crossed his face. "Gianni," Dante barked, "on your tragic left, take Alina upstairs." Gianni grabbed my elbow and hauled me toward the stairs. "Come on, Signorina. I would very much like to survive whatever operatic revenge scene is about to happen." At the top landing, I twisted back. Dante stood in the cellar doorway, gun low, eyes on the men who had taken me. Blood had soaked through his old bandage again. His shirt clung dark to his shoulder. He looked less like a man than the thing grief becomes when it finally allows itself teeth. For me. And somehow that was more frightening than if he had said it. Outside, rain hit the broken bakery windows in silver lines. Sirens neared. Luca leaned against the wall, bleeding and upright, refusing to fall. "Marco escaped out back," he said. Dante came up the stairs behind us. Only one look passed between us. It said enough. One of us might not survive what came next. By midnight, we knew where Marco would go. Not because he was careless, because he was sentimental. The final missing pages were not in the bakery. They had been removed years earlier, and hidden exactly where a man like Marco would return to reclaim power, if everything else began to collapse. The private chapel vault, beneath the old Salvator mausoleum in Calvary Cemetery, where Dante's father stored ledgers before he trusted banks more than God. I learned that from Tommaso. He did not die in the cellar, not immediately. Dante had him brought back to the house and set under guard in the downstairs parlor that still smelled faintly of smoke. I stood in the doorway when Dante questioned him, though every instinct I had once owned told me to leave before men started breaking each other. Dante never raised his voice. That was somehow worse. Tommaso, pale with blood loss, laughed once when asked about Marco. "You still think this city can be cleaned one body at a time?" Dante's face gave nothing away. "And you think filth deserves inheritance?" Tommaso looked at him almost tenderly. "No, I think you miss your sister so much you built religion where strategy used to be." The room went still. Lucia. I had never heard her name spoken aloud, but I saw what it did, a wound precise enough to turn the air to glass. Dante did not strike him. He only asked, "Where?" Tommaso smiled through the pain. "The family chapel. Your father always liked the irony." Then he looked at me. "And your little bravery brought you right to it." Dante's hand tightened on the chair back until wood cracked under his grip. Tommaso died before dawn from internal bleeding the doctor could not stop. No confession grand enough to clean what he had chosen. Only a body in a sheet and silence behind it. The cemetery gates opened at 1:30 in the morning. I should not have gone. I went anyway. Dante argued once, briefly. Then stopped when he understood that leaving me behind now would not make me safer, only blind. Gianni drove, muttering that no amount of salary justified graveyard operations in Italian formal wear. Rosa kissed my forehead before we left and tucked a rosary into my coat pocket without comment. Calvary at night was all stone angels, wet paths, and cold that felt personal. The Salvator chapel sat at the far end of the family row, pale marble under a black sky. Marco's men were already inside. We knew because the side door lock had been cut, and there was light under the threshold. Luca took the east wall with 2 men. Gianni the west, complaining softly about cardio. Dante and I entered through the lower crypt stairs because Marco had always preferred exits to sanctity. The crypt smelled like damp limestone and candle wax gone old. Shelves of family vaults lined the walls. At the far end, beyond a gate of wrought iron, stood the records cabinet. Marco was waiting there. Of course he was, gun in one hand, ledger pages in the other. "This is what I loved about you," he said when Dante stepped into the light. "You always come yourself." Dante moved slightly in front of me without thinking. I also finish things myself, he said. Marco's eyes flicked to me, then to my stomach. There's the future. How moving. I wanted to spit at him. Instead I said, my father wrote down your names. Marco smiled. Your father was a romantic accountant. It got him killed. Dante's voice stayed level. Drop the pages. No, then everything accelerated. A shot from the side aisle. One of Marco's men, hidden behind the third vault column. Dante turned, fired, shoved me down behind a marble bier in the same motion. Dust sprayed my face. The ledger pages flew from Marco's hand into the wet crypt floor. I saw them first. So did Marco. He lunged. I moved before fear could explain itself. Crawling around the bier, I snatched the top page and slid it inside Rose's rosary pouch under my coat, just as Marco reached me. He caught my arm hard enough to bruise. Dante saw. What happened next would live in me forever, not because it was bloody, because it was efficient. 2 steps, 1 shot to Marco's shoulder, a pivot. Knife to the wrist, gun kicked away. Marco slammed into the records cabinet with a crack of old wood and pain. Dante had him by the throat before the echoes died. No speech, no threat. Only that terrible stillness. Marco bared his teeth. There he is. Dante's grip tightened. You had her touched. You let yourself have a weakness. Dante's face changed then, not into rage, but into a grief so deep it had finally burned out every softer disguise. You killed Lucia. The words rang through the crypt. Marco went very still. I froze behind the bier. Lucia, pregnant, sister. Marco smiled slowly despite the blood. I killed hesitation. She was simply standing too close to it. The world broke. Dante hit him then. Once, not wildly, not enough, just enough to answer history. Marco laughed through split lips. And now you'll bury the city the same way your father did. Don't pretend you're better. You only waited longer to become him. That was the mirror. What Dante feared, what he could still become. He looked down at Marco, and for one suspended second I did not know which man would stand up from that floor. Then Dante released his throat. Not mercy, choice. He took the ledger pages from the blood and water, handed them to me, and said, read the names to Luca. Marco blinked. Dante turned to the doorway, where sirens were finally staining the night blue through the chapel glass. It goes public, Dante said. All of it. Marco's expression changed for the first time. Real fear, not of death, of exposure. You'd burn your own house, Dante looked back once. You built it that way. Marco reached for the fallen gun anyway. Dante shot him cleanly through the chest. It was over. No triumph followed. Only the sound of my own breathing, the wet rustle of paper in my shaking hands, and the knowledge that victory had cost Dante the last living piece of the world he inherited. Outside, dawn had not yet come. Inside the crypt, the old empire began to bleed out. It was over. The war did not end with the gunshot. It ended in statements, seizures, resignations, raids, funerals, and the long, ugly work of choosing what rot to expose first. The names from the duplicate ledger reached the right federal task force through a lawyer Dante trusted and no one else. Half the city pretended to be shocked. The other half updated their loyalties before lunch. Luca survived, though he moved like every stair in the house had personally offended him. Gianni survived too, and told anyone who listened that he had conducted himself with uncommon athletic nobility under crypt conditions. Rosa kissed his unbandaged cheek once in the kitchen when she thought no one saw. And he spent the rest of the day pretending this had not happened, while salting soup with the concentration of a neurosurgeon. Winter pressed in properly after that, snow against the gates, frost silvering the lake. Men posted farther out now, quieter than before. The Salvetter house did not become safe. It simply learned a new shape around danger. So did I. By February, I was no longer living in the guest wing. No announcement had been made, no dramatic decisions spoken into candlelight. My things simply migrated one drawer at a time to the room at the end of Dante's corridor, because that was where I kept ending up after nightmares, after doctor visits. After evenings when the baby kicked so hard, I needed both hands and his silence beside me to remember my body was still mine. The first time I woke in his bed at dawn and panicked, he didn't touch me. He only said, from the chair by the window where he had apparently spent half the night working, "If I wanted to trap you, little brave." I would not start with blankets. I laughed against the pillow before I could stop myself. That was when I knew I was already gone, not lost, chosen. The baby came in March with Rosa, commanding the room like a field marshal and Gianni band, from entering, because his fear of medical needles had reached such operatic proportions, he nearly fainted in the hallway before the first contraction peaked. "It's not cowardice," he called weakly through the door. "It's a highly developed respect for invasive equipment," Luca muttered. "You're sweating through your suit. I'm emotionally available, that's all." 3 hours later. Our son arrived red-faced and outraged with life. Dante did not cry. He went very still in that dangerous way of his, took the baby when Rosa placed him there, and looked down as if someone had handed him a live grenade that had chosen not to explode. "Matteo Paolo Salvator," I whispered, exhausted and weeping and laughing all at once. "For my father, for the man who had wanted one more normal day." Dante lifted his eyes to mine. He did not say thank you. He did not need to. Everything that mattered was already breaking open in his face. By summer, we spent mornings in the courtyard with Matteo in a basket, beneath the fig tree, and evenings at the long kitchen table, because I preferred Rosa's copper pots to the formal dining room, and Dante preferred wherever I insisted on being. Gianni remained hopelessly in love with Rosa, who continued to feed him cream sauces while criticizing his protein powders as if they had insulted her mother. One night, while Matteo slept in the crook of my arm and the windows stood open to lake air, I found Dante in the study with the silver lighter turning between his fingers. He looked up. "You should be asleep. So should you." He set the lighter down. Click. The sound no longer warned me, it called me. I crossed the room and leaned against the desk. "What are you doing?" "Reviewing contracts. At midnight. It prevents Gianni from pitching hospitality ventures." I smiled. "He's serious about the health-focused cafe. He suggested bone broth flights. He's visionary." Dante's hand closed over mine where it rested on the desk blotter. Warm, heavy, certain. Almost a year ago, that touch would have terrified me. Now it steadied something I had not known could ever become ordinary. "There's a house on the north side," he said. I blinked. "What?" He did not look away. "Smaller, less history in the walls, better kitchen." My heart began to pound for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Are you asking me to move?" "No." He lifted my hand and pressed his mouth once to my knuckles. "I'm asking whether you want a life with me that isn't built entirely inside inherited damage." The room went quiet around us. I could hear Matteo fuss softly down the hall, a car passing the gates. The old house settling as if it too were listening. "You make proposals like contract amendments," I said. "It's honest." I looked at him, really looked, at the scar near his temple. The hand that had once tied my cut fingers in linen. The mouth that still said less than it felt. The man who had chosen not to become his father in the one room where it would have been easiest. "What if I say yes?" I whispered. His thumb moved once over my pulse. "Then I spend the rest of my life earning the answer." My throat tightened so sharply it hurt. I slid my hand free, only so I could step around the desk and stand between his knees. He looked up at me, all composure and danger, and the rare nakedness of a man who had finally asked for something he could not take. "Yes," I said. The word barely made it out before his hands found my waist. "Say it again," he murmured. I smiled through tears. "Yes." He rested his forehead against my stomach, where our son had once lived hidden from him. When he looked up, his voice had gone low and warm, and entirely unlike the first cold use of the name that had once unsettled me to the bone. "My little brave." The house beyond the study remained what it was, guarded, compromised, never clean. But inside that room, at that quiet table of a future, something ordinary and radical began. 9 months later, Our son learned how to bang a spoon against the kitchen table with enough conviction to terrify saints. Rosa said it was excellent lung development. Gianni said it was clearly percussion genius and offered to manage Matteo's future brand. Luca, who now tolerated the child with the stoicism of a man being professionally conquered, stood by the pantry door and let Matteo chew his expensive watch strap without comment. The kitchen was bright in the afternoon. Lemon peel on the cutting board, butter warming under cloth. The windows open to late September air carrying like cold and rosemary from the garden. I was making a chocolate hazelnut torte for Rosa's birthday because love in this house still traveled fastest through food, and because the first year of peace deserved sugar with structure. Matteo, our Matteo, round-cheeked and determined, sat in his high chair attacking a wooden spoon. Near the far counter, the original Matteo from Il Fiore, now 18 and apprenticing with Rosa 3 mornings a week, sifted cocoa with grave concentration. "Gentler," I told him. "Let the flour fall, don't punish it," teenage Matteo grinned. "That sounds like something Rosa would say." Rosa, from the stove. "That's because I taught her correctly." Gianni entered carrying a produce box against his chest and wearing sunglasses indoors for reasons no one respected. "I have basil, peaches, and devastating news," he announced. "I am 32 years old and still unloved by the woman whose polenta has ruined me for all others." Rosa did not turn from the sauce. "If you cry into my kitchen, I charge rent." "I'm not crying, I'm marinating emotionally." I laughed and reached for the offset spatula. That was when Dante came in. The room changed, but softly now. No silence of fear, only the subtle awareness of gravity shifting toward one person. He had come straight from a meeting downtown. I could tell by the dark suit and the cool outside smell still clinging to him under cologne. His silver lighter flashed briefly as he set his keys on the sideboard. Click. Matteo, the baby, immediately looked up at the sound and kicked both feet. Dante's face altered at once. No matter what the rest of the city still called him, this was my favorite thing about power, watching it kneel. He crossed the kitchen, loosened his tie one-handed, and bent to kiss my temple before touching the baby's curls. "How was court?" I asked. "Slow, anyone disgrace themselves publicly. 2 aldermen and a banker." Gianni looked heavenward. "Nature is healing." Teenage Matteo snorted. Rosa handed Gianni a spoonful of sauce with the absent mercy one extends to loyal idiots. I smoothed ganache over the torte and glanced up in time to catch Dante watching me. Not my body. Not the room, my hands. The way I worked carefully around the fragile edge first, making sure the outer shell held before finishing the center. He noticed things like that, always had. "Too much glaze on the left," I murmured to teenage Matteo. "Turn the plate, don't fight the angle," he obeyed at once. From the open service door, at the rear entrance, came the sudden harsh sound of a man's raised voice. One of the newer guards, young, proud, stupid with his volume, arguing with someone at the garden gate. Our baby startled. Teenage Matteo froze with the sieve halfway raised. Dante's head turned. And before I could think, before memory even reached language, I heard myself say it the same way I had in the restaurant on the first night he saw me. "Not in front of the boy." The kitchen went still, not with fear, with recognition. Dante looked at me across the table, at the baby in his chair, at the apprentice boy by the flour bin. At the life built in defiance of rooms that had once taught us all to harden first and ask questions later. Something passed over his face, so naked and deep it made my breath catch. He turned toward the open door and said, in a voice calm enough to carry without wounding, "Take it outside." The guard's reply vanished instantly. No spectacle, no lesson made from terror. Just choice. When Dante looked back at me, the years between that broken glass and this bright kitchen seemed to fold together like dough under practiced hands. He came to my side. One hand settled at the nape of my neck. "Warm, certain, home. You still do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" His thumb brushed once just below my ear. "Reach for softness first." My throat tightened. Around us, life resumed. Rosa scolding the sauce. Gianni bargaining for affection through carbohydrates, Luca pretending not to let the baby win. Teenage Matteo resuming his sift with exaggerated seriousness. Ordinary, it was the most radical thing we had ever built. Dante took the silver lighter from his pocket and flicked it alive under the candles Rosa refused to admit she wanted on her cake. The flame rose small and steady. He clicked it shut and set it aside. Same sound, different world. Rosa rolled her eyes but smiled anyway when we carried the torte to the table. Matteo banged his spoon. Gianni sang terribly on purpose. Dante stood at my shoulder with one hand at my waist, and when I leaned into him, it was no longer surrender. It was recognition. After cake, after laughter, after the baby finally slept, and the house settled into its layered night music, Dante found me alone at the back terrace where rain once taught us each other in fragments. The lake was black glass. The air smelled of rosemary and cooling stone. He wrapped a blanket around both of us and drew me against him from behind. "Happy?" he asked. It should have been an easy question. It was. I looked out over the dark water and thought about my father, Paolo, Lucia, whom I had never met and still somehow grieved, Tommaso in the parlor, Marco in the crypt, all the cost braided into this quiet. "Yes," I said at last, and not peacefully. His mouth touched my hair. "Good, I'd distrust a cleaner answer." I smiled. Then he tipped my chin up until I looked at him. "No more trains before dawn," he murmured. "No more crypts after midnight," I answered, a rare, brief smile. Then, softer than any first prayer, "Come inside, my little brave." I went. And if there was still a shadow over the life we had built, it was not because love had failed to earn its place. It was because love had earned it in blood, and neither of us would ever be simple enough again to forget the price. So tell me this, would you have chosen Dante, knowing how many people had to bleed before he learned how to love without destroying what he touched? Or was Alina right to come back anyway, because some darkness is still worth choosing when it learns restraint? Have you ever loved someone enough to walk back through the leaving door with your eyes open?